Welcome to the Prospective Doctor podcast, brought to you by Med School Coach. Each week we cover topics related to the pre-med journey to medical school and beyond, from the MCAT to completing your application and from starting medical school to choosing a specialty. Our podcast will provide essential information for anyone contemplating a career in medicine.
Hey everybody, Dr. Mehta from the Prospective Doctor team here to introduce to you this awesome new miniseries that we've put together. Now, this is a miniseries focused on BSMD or direct med programs. For those of you that are not familiar with them, these are programs that high school students can apply to directly from high school that oftentimes guarantee them a seat in medical school after they finish the college portion of their education. Now, we've got Yash and Shree, two students who've gone through the BSMD programs, been accepted, sat on the admissions committees. These guys know everything there is to know about BSMD programs, and their discussion is going to be so helpful for those of you out there, both parents and students, who are thinking about these direct medical or BSMD programs. So stay tuned, listen to the whole mini-series. I think you're going to love it.
Hi, everyone. Today, we're here and going to talk about just like a couple experiences of application processes to BSMD programs. My name is Yash, and I'm here with Shree.
Hey, guys.
Both of us have gone through the application process. We're both currently in medical school, so we're here to tell you it does work. You can get into these programs. It is fun. There's light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add that, so we just started medical school, and it's just honestly a dream come true. Like when we just put on that white coat and stuff, like it's definitely very surreal. So like having this kind of program to kind of get you there is definitely a real big asset, and it got us here quicker than most, and kind of it was a choice that I made and I don't regret it. So
yeah, I totally agree with that. I had similar experiences a few weeks ago putting on the white coat for the first time. It just feels different. You being in a program, you've thought about it for a while, but you don't really understand what it really means to be a medical student until you get there. That being said, let's back up a little bit. Let's maybe just do a short little intro for maybe some first-time listeners on what exactly we mean when we're talking about direct BSMD programs. Shree, do you want to start us off with that?
Yeah, sure. So basically, a BSMD program is a 7-year or an 8-year commitment in which you have like a conditional acceptance to a medical school base straight out of high school. It's interesting that these programs exist because some of them have different variants. Some of them have 3 years at the undergraduate institution or 4 years at the undergraduate institution, but mostly the allure is having that conditional acceptance at the end of the road. So in high school, you have some students who are very interested in medicine and they want to go to medical school. So out of the box, they have decided to kind of apply to both the undergrad institution as well as the medical school, and it kind of skips the formal medical school application process. And the thing that you kind of waive is the requirements that most med schools have, which is the medical school admissions test, which is called the MCAT, and the high GPA barrier that's required to apply and successfully matriculate into medical school. So mostly why I chose a program was, at least my program that I eventually matriculated into and the medical school I'm going to are all in-state, and that was a huge part of the allure for me. And also by personality, I'm a very risk-averse person, but so I decided like having that kind of path was a really good choice for me because I was really interested in the biomedical field. But that's what I've found like most people who have come into this path have looked for in terms of they were already interested in medicine starting from high school and they kind of wanted that conditional acceptance. Wouldn't you agree?
Totally. I think you hit a lot of great points. Thank you for sharing. Definitely hit what these BSMD programs are. And I think you made a good point about the safety of a conditional acceptance. Now, what you do with this conditional acceptance is really up to you. You kind of have to ask yourself, like, why do I really want this? Like, what am I going to do with this free time that I'm going to gain in college? This test that Shree hit on, the MCAT, that is not an easy test. And people spend almost like half a year studying for it sometimes just to get a good enough score to matriculate to these medical schools. You're going to get a lot of time that your peers just simply don't have. And you have to think about, what are we going to use it for in undergrad? So I think these BSMD programs are best thought of as something that allows you to explore passions other than medicine. Medicine is a lifelong passion, a lifelong career. it's honestly a blessing and a boon to have your undergrad years to not just do these sciences and medical related things, but also to have time to, explore your other passions. You're 18, 19, 20 years old. There are other things to do in life. And you might decide that you still want to go and do and experience all those medical experiences and only focus on medicine. That's totally up to you. But I think this aspect of the time and the freedom that BSMD programs provide is really important. What do you think, Shree?
Yeah, I think that you hit on a good point in terms of having the freedom to explore. So speaking from personal experience, I know that something that I never decided to do in high school, at least in terms of when I was applying to colleges, I had done extracurriculars that I was interested in, but I needed to devote a lot of time to them. So I didn't really get a chance to explore outside of those extracurriculars that I decided going in, at least in like sophomore year, junior year coming around. I didn't get to explore to more extracurriculars that my high school had offered because I was kind of knee deep in the extracurriculars that I had, and I had to say no to some opportunities. But when I got to college, at least in the BSMD program, I decided to join a different kind of extracurricular that I'd never done before, and that was dance. And I'd never danced before, and I thought that I couldn't dance. But those few years, I decided to do something that I didn't do before. I did Frisbee and other extracurriculars that I wouldn't have had an opportunity to do had I been in the pre-med mindset. I think that the application for medical school is really daunting, and people don't like to take risks when applying. And it's funny that I said most people who come into BSMD are risk-averse personalities, but when they get there, I find that a lot of people have the freedom to do what they've never done and kind of lose that kind of risk-averse personality when they get to college.
I totally agree with you. I've had kind of very similar experiences, and I think my peers who are in the programs have had similar experiences as well. It's just kind of weight off your shoulder that not everything has to be for your CV, not everything has to be for your resume, that not everything has to look good for medical schools, right? And that's not saying that these experiences don't look good. A lot of times these medical schools are looking for, kids who are exploring other passions and stuff. But it's just, like you said, it's since you have the safety of the acceptance, you're able to experience these things. And I'm really happy that you started talking about kind of your experience. I think that brings us to kind of the main point of this specific talk and podcast. I think me and Shree both wanted to talk about our personal experiences applying to these medical programs. I know it can seem kind of daunting, especially if you're a parent or if you're a kid currently in high school. You might think, what is this process? Like, how do I get into these programs? What is it going to take? And like, how stressful is it going to be? How is it going to be different from just my peers who are maybe just applying to four-year colleges like we hear about everywhere? So I think if you guys get to hear our stories, maybe it'll put you at ease a little bit and you'll be able to understand kind of what this actually is.
Yeah, and I think that something like this, when I was applying, would be super helpful, just because we were talking about this before the podcast, but I decided super late that I was going to apply to BSMD programs, and I knew a few family friends who were in a BSMD program. So that's how I learned about the application and what it entailed. But had I not had those connections in terms of having someone I knew in a BSMD program, there's kind of a dearth of information out there about what exactly it entails. Yeah, sure, there's a general advice, but just having a step-by-step plan in terms of how to apply, how to interview, what kind of questions are they going to ask, what is, like my first interview weekend, I didn't know anything. And when I got there, people were talking about, oh, how are you going to prepare for the group interview, the regular interview? And I was like, there's group interviews? Like, I didn't even know that these interview weekends were so formal and you needed to prepare for them. But yeah, so I guess talking about the experiences in this manner would have definitely helped me in terms of giving it outside into the internet, just seeing who can benefit from it.
Totally agree with you. I still remember I didn't own a suit. I remember going to Men's Warehouse and picking out a suit for my first interview, and I was so lost. I was like, I didn't even know that I had to wear a suit for this, stuff like that.
Exactly.
And also, I just wanted to add in terms of like, if anyone is looking for like a list or kind of more applicable direct questions and answers or some kind of document or some kind of advice on these things, med school coach and prospective doctor both offer these resources, and they can also help set up meetings with counselors and phone calls with counselors, and they're great resources. Today, we're really just going to focus on our personal experiences, but if anyone is interested in these kind of resources, feel free to reach out to both med school coach or prospective doctor. They're great for these kind of things.
And I would also kind of second that notion in terms of the resources are top notch. And I know that their advisors are very good because they're actual doctors who have most of the times been through the program, and they can help edit your essays. They can help you prepare you for interviews and what kind of questions they're going to ask at these interviews as well.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so let's get into it. So I actually, just like Shree, learned about BSMD programs kind of late. I'd say it was my summer before senior year is when I really started learning more about them. I'd heard about them here and there, similar to you, Shree, just from family friends who were in the programs, but it all seemed very abstract to me. If I had had something like this where I could maybe listen to someone actually talk about it, maybe I would not feel that way. But at that time, at that age, I was just like, oh, that's like crazy, like outlandish. I don't know what that even means. Kind of like this far away concept, right? So I learned about it. I knew I had wanted to go into medicine since a pretty young age. I'd kind of spent most of my high school years doing stuff within the healthcare field, volunteering, research, stuff like that. But I didn't know that these programs would be so beneficial and kind of available for undergrad students. So when I started looking into them, I realized that it was a little confusing. I don't know if you had the same experience, Shree, but when I went online, like, there wasn't a ton of information, and I was kind of lost as to which undergrad programs are linked to which medical schools, stuff like that.
Yeah. And I think the most difficult part for me was navigating the deadlines, because each med school and each college had a different deadline. At least for my friends who were applying to traditional 4-year universities, it was pretty clear the Common App deadline is January 1st. And once you submit. Yeah, there's a few schools here and there where it changes, but for the most part, once you submit on January 1st, you're basically done for the year. But that's not how it works for BSMD programs. There's deadlines throughout the year. So I was really confused as to which med school has which deadline and when I need to travel for the interviews. And I think that was the most tricky part, keeping everything in check, especially when you have classes to deal with as a senior in high school and you kind of want to have fun too, second semester.
Yeah, 100%. I totally agree with that. Like, you're trying to balance A, your classes, B, you have other applications too. Like, anyone who's applying to BSMD programs, you're applying to other kind of regular 4-year programs as well. And C, it's your senior year. You're trying to enjoy yourself. You're trying to, these are some people you might not see again for a long time. So yeah, it's definitely a stressful time, but it gets better. I don't know about you, Shree, but second semester, senior year was definitely a good, relaxing time for me.
Yeah, for sure.
Touching back on these BSMD for a second, learning about BSMD and the decision to apply to them actually fundamentally changed my application search and process. I'm from a suburb of Boston. So growing up in my suburb, it was basically like just most people applied to schools in Boston. Boston's known as like a college town. There are a lot of different schools in the area. And I didn't really think about applying too far away from Boston until I realized that, a BSMD program would be pretty useful for me and what I wanted to do. And that expanded my search to regions of the US that I had not even considered before. And this is something that you might see happen to you as well, depending on obviously your priorities and what you're looking for. And I mentioned that daunting list, the list of different BSMD programs. Don't feel like you have to apply to all of these programs. I applied to 5 or 6 programs. I had a big list in front of me. I remember going through the list with my family, going through the list with some people who were helping me out, advisors, and just realizing that, not every single BSMD program is for me. And just really taking the time to only apply to ones that I could really see myself going to. Shree, do you have a similar experience or something different?
I just wanted to touch on something that you said before in terms of having kind of that list and talking about like the culture of different schools. When you're looking at your list and trying to figure out the targets in terms of what BSMD program that you want to go to, I just want to stress that you should definitely look at the med school as well as the undergraduate school, because med school is where you're going to spend a majority of your years in the program, because there's 3 years in undergrad, but also 4 years in the med school. So even though it seems like a far off world where you might not think about it when you're 18 at the time, something that I wish I also had done was look at the med school as well. And I think that it's kind of a different sort of process in terms of looking at a BSMD program, because you have twice the amount of schools to process through, because there's 2 schools to every BSMD program. Usually it's the home institution. And I know, Yash, your school is the same as your undergraduate institution. Some of them are like that, but some of them are totally different. For example, mine is at a different institution than my undergrad institution, and some of them are like that. So you just have to be aware of that when you're looking at your list.
No, that's a really good point. Like I said, these lists are confusing. Shree already said this. Some undergrad schools could be linked to 2 different med schools, or, one med school could be linked to 2 different undergrad schools for the BSMD program. So it's very important to look at the medical school as well. As Shree said, it's entirely possible that you spend more time at your medical school. And at the end of the day, if you're going to graduate with both an undergrad degree and a medical degree, most people are not going to look at your undergrad degree once they see your medical degree, right? So you really want to look at your medical schools and see if you'd enjoy it there, see if you want to go to these medical schools. That's a really good point.
And some people don't like to stay in 8 years at the same location. I know that sometimes you get tired of a location and you kind of want to move from that location. And if your BSMD program is at the same place, then you might get bored, or even worse, you might want to move out, or just feel stifled in an environment. And you just have to have that self-awareness. And since you already have the self-awareness to plan where you're going to be for the next 8 years or 7 years of your life, might as well put in a little extra effort and say, will I really like it here after I finish my undergrad? And I know you might not be able to tell it now, but I guess just make a educated decision or educated guess on whether you would want to stay for that 8 years, and kind of process your list that way.
Right. And nothing is hard and fast, right? At the end of the day, if you get into a program, you go and you still want to apply out to medical schools, a lot of these programs will allow you to do that. Not all of them, but a lot of them will. So it's not something that you need to have a concrete answer to, but I think Shree is making a really good point. It's just something to think about. For me, for example, as Shree said, I'm at the same institution, but my undergraduate campus was in a suburb, and I had to move downtown for the medical school. So I still felt like there was a significant change. And I honestly, until you said it, Shree, I hadn't thought about it. But I think I would have felt a little bit different. I would have got a little tired of if I had to stay in the same place for another 4 years. I think I really was I needed a change. And it was only it's a factor of 10 miles, right? But it's the difference between a suburb and a city. It's just different. We're not living in that college town anymore. So it's something to think about. People are different, and you might like different things, but I think that's a really good point.
Yeah. And I think this would be a great point to kind of shift focus and other things to think about when you're applying to these schools and trying to cull down your list of programs in terms of figuring out a target school or what kind of institution you would like to go to. I actually have a question for you. When you were talking about, I only applied to 5 places, I only applied to 3, and something that I really placed a huge emphasis on was location. And I would only apply outside my geographic locality if it's an institution with good prestige, or at least in terms of the programs, it would be a good fit in terms of having the resources to provide for a research background, in terms of having the funding for undergraduates to do research. That was something that I looked for in a university that was outside my geographic location, because I really wanted to stay close to home, but having the allure of having more undergraduate opportunities, that would convince me to apply out of my first pass in terms of my first criteria of location. So what questions were going through your mind in terms of processing those 5 schools that you eventually applied to?
Yeah, 100%. So I kind of similar boat, initially thought I wanted to stay home. I only applied to programs where, and I actually truly mean this, I actually visited a lot of these places, and I really only applied to places where I thought that I would accept an acceptance, or I would matriculate. I would be very happy to go to these places. There were places I visited that I didn't see myself really wanting to go to, so I didn't apply. And I think that's, not everyone is going to want to make that decision or is going to feel that way. I just thought that if I was going to move away, I wanted it to be somewhere where I thought, at least at the time, that I would be like really happy and would really want to go to. A lot of that for me was, as I said, visiting and just feeling it out. You mentioned like prestige and also opportunities. I factored that in as well. But I think for me, I wasn't able to truly get a feel for it until I did some deep research and visited a lot of these places. So yeah, and we already talked about how it's important to look at the medical school too, but that doesn't mean don't value like the undergrad school either. You're going to make some formative friendships there. I know my undergrad years were very formative for me. I've made a lot of good friends, most of which, or not most, but a lot of which are not even in the BSMD program, but are also not even pre-meds, And I think this diversity and having these diverse kind of backgrounds is in the end, I mean, this is like kind of a deeper concept, maybe a talk for another day, but that's what makes a good doctor really, is being able to connect with a lot of different people, having different experiences. So I think, look at the medical schools, make sure that these are medical schools you want to spend time at, that you want to graduate from. But don't discount the undergrad either. Make sure it's somewhere where you're going to grow, where you're going to learn, where you're going to make friends.
And I just wanted to touch on that a little bit. Some of these programs, they offer majors that aren't bio or the typical pre-med major. They offer majors that are as diverse as economics, Spanish. I know my program has tons of majors that you can choose from that account for the BSMD curriculum, and they have you take the pre-med courses, but they're kind of lessened in terms of the typical pre-med coursework. You don't have to take all of the gamut of pre-med courses. For example, I know that med schools do recommend biochemistry, psych, and for our program at least, you just have to take the bare bones of pre-med curricula before you get into med school. And some would say maybe that's not the best preparation, but I would argue that looking at the breadth of education, wouldn't you want to maximize your time at the undergraduate institution, just taking courses that are outside the purview of just pre-med? And as you were saying, you have friends who are across the spectrum of intellectual disciplines. And I think that having those connections would not only help deepen your perspective in med school when you're learning about these diseases, but also it gives you a release, because sometimes you just don't want to be in the neurotic haze of pre-med classes and all the baggage that comes with it.
Yeah, completely. I took that into a huge factor. I forgot to mention it. I really was only looking at BSMD programs that would allow me to branch out, do something else with my undergrad time. Obviously, all of them, you have to complete the pre-med requirements, but I was looking at programs that really allowed me to, if I wanted to, I didn't know at the time what I wanted to study. It could have been bio, right? It could have been a pre-med discipline, but I wanted something that would allow me the freedom to pick something else if I wanted to, and I only applied to programs that would allow that. There's actually one program that I applied to that didn't allow that I didn't really know about until I got to the interview. And once I got to the interview, which is, we'll get to that later, but a lot of times these interviews also serve as like half of like an info session, just to get you introed into like what their medical school's like and stuff that really not available, information not available otherwise. And once I got to that point, I realized that, like actually, even if I get into the school, I don't really want to go. I don't know. Everyone has a different perspective. For me, I thought if I'm going to do all these things and I'm going to be like a pre-med who's kind of has to do all the pre-med requirements, all the research requirements, do the major that they're telling me to do. At that point, like, to me, I thought I would just apply to medical school and I would probably get in.
Yeah, exactly. So out of curiosity, did you end up majoring in bio or did you do something else?
So I'm a political science major.
Oh, okay. So yeah, like that's totally relevant, at least in the debate that we're having right now in healthcare policy. It's good to have a doctor who's informed on that in terms of what kind of reimbursement or insurance coverage his patients have. Like, that's just really good to have. And just like having a different perspective, or at least learning about the political climate in terms of what exactly encompasses political theory, that's just a huge asset in med school. At least that's what I think.
Yeah, no, thanks for saying that. I mean, I didn't go into it thinking that I'd be a political science major. I took one of the classes because I thought it looked interesting, and friends had told me that it was pretty easy. So I went into it, took it. I actually ended up loving it. The professor was really cool. Thought I'd get the minor. started doing the minor, realized that it was just a few more classes for the major, and I just dropped my neuro major and just did the poli-sci major and completed the pre-med requirements. Mm-hmm. Something that I 100% would not have felt comfortable doing if I had to apply to medical schools.
And at least speaking from my experience, I came in as an econ major, but in our program, you can actually finish earlier than the allocated 3 years and spend that last year doing something that you truly enjoy and want to do for fun. So basically what I did was I ended up switching to the bio major because it was easier to complete, and I actually finished my undergrad portion in 2 years and then spent that last year kind of doing things that interest me. I traveled a lot. I went with my friend to Europe and we traveled there and just had a good time before med school. So that freedom, I don't think a 4-year curriculum plus maybe applying and everything would have afforded me that. So I think that saving that year and also having a year to kind of explore and really develop my own persona, I think that was a really, really good investment of my time.
Yeah, that actually sounds awesome. 2 years, wow, that's unbelievable. That's awesome that you got that third year. I actually had a very similar experience, but I did it for my fourth year. So my program is either 3 or 4 years at the undergrad level. So I finished up most of my requirements in 3 years. I had like 1 or 2 classes left that I had to take. And I just took, those couple classes in the first quarter. And then I was just kind of free to do what I wanted to, explore other passions. I worked like a real job for the first time. And a lot of pre-meds don't have that experience. Like I was able to experience what corporate America kind of is like. And then I traveled obviously too. You got to fit that in, before 4 years of nothing. Yeah. But I think a lot of like pre-meds are not lucky enough to have these experiences that, like I said, like can actually make you a good doctor. I think experiencing the corporate world and knowing how decisions are made in that arena is vital to understanding how healthcare is going to work, not just now, but in the future.
And at least in terms of the job that you work, did you find that was just a 6-month commitment, or like what made you pursue that?
Yeah, so I heard about the job through my undergrad school, actually. They offer like a co-op program. So I heard about it through that. I did it through the co-op at first, and then afterwards I just stayed on, not necessarily through the school. I just, they were happy to have me and I just stayed. So I ended up working there for a little bit over 7 months, I'd say. Some part-time with school, some full-time. It was a great experience. It was also in the same kind of area as where my school is, and I was still able to basically like be in college while also working. You made a little bit of money, which is also always nice for a college kid. Always
a plus. Yeah. Especially with medical school loans.
Exactly. Not that I saved a lot of it, but yeah, for sure. I think we're having great discussion, Shree. I think maybe we should actually split this up into a couple episodes. I know I started this by talking about how we're going to like kind of run through our application stories and our stories about how we applied to medical school. Yeah, I think we've kind of talked about the search process to a decent level in this one. I don't want to throw too much in one episode. I'd be happy to kind of do a second episode that really focuses in on the application and interviews. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that would be a good idea. And I think that having parts to our discussion would definitely kind of have a continuity so people could kind of look at the part that helps them most.
Yeah, I actually kind of crazy. We had pretty similar experiences in terms of our search. And until we kind of talked about it, I didn't realize how much went into it. So I'm hoping that people are able to learn and kind of benefit from this.
Yeah, for sure. Me too. And I think that people who are on the cusp of applying and aren't sure whether they should, I think that they should definitely consider what the flip side would be if they didn't apply. Like, definitely the financial costs to me, like not many people talk about the financial cost, but I think I'm going to end with that because it's on a lot of people's minds. In terms of searching for schools, think about the search that you're doing right now, and then think about the same search that you're going to have to do in 4 years for medical school. That kind of opportunity cost of spending that year and that time enjoying versus doing applications, interviews, and finally matriculating into medical school is a lot of time and effort that you could be spending in medical school with a 7-year program, or like Yash, working at a job and getting different experiences. So I think at least from the financial costs of applying to medical school, that's thousands of dollars right there, and spending 4 years in school as opposed to 3, or maybe even 2 if some programs allow you to graduate a little bit earlier and spend that time doing something that you enjoy. I think that the time and financial costs, both, they definitely skew the favor to the BSMD programs if you are interested, in fact, in having that conditional acceptance. So that's kind of where I'm going to end it in terms of the search process, keeping in mind your interests as well as financial and time considerations.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. As for me, I think I'm going to end by maybe actually walking back what I said earlier a little bit. Not that much, but just, I think it's probably rare out of BSMD applicants to meet 2 people who applied to as few programs as Shree and I did. Would you agree, Shree?
Yeah, definitely. I think that the people that I met at interviews definitely applied to the whole range. And my roommate in med school right now, he's part of the BSMD program. He only applied to BSMD programs and he applied to about 15. So
yeah, so I guess the point I'm trying to make is just because we applied to select programs and we were pretty particular about the search, as I'd say, doesn't mean that you necessarily have to be. If your priority is getting into a BSMD program, I would probably actually say, apply to as many as you can. As Shree just mentioned, there's so many big advantages to BSMD programs, and the opportunity cost is amazing. So, you have to weigh these decisions for yourselves. I kind of want to not take back, but I do just kind of want to say, just because someone looks at it one way doesn't mean that you have to look at it that way. These are just kind of our experiences. And I do want everyone to have an open mind when they're going through the search process. Yeah, that's, I think, where I'll leave off. I think next time we'll talk a little bit more about the actual physical application, what goes into that, and then maybe the interview as well, depending on, how much we have to say about that. But yeah, thanks so much for listening. If you have any questions, please let us know. We'll include our emails in this post. Thanks.
Thanks again, and catch us next time.
Our mission is to inspire, encourage, and inform students as you journey through a rigorous and intricate process of achieving your dreams in medicine. Visit us at prospectivedoctor.com and medschoolcoach.com for more essential resources in your medical school journey and beyond.